Chandler fell down an entire flight of stairs, smashing his head in the process. Over the course of that day, he started to feel woozy and disoriented, and his legs started to feel numb. And so in a panic, he rushed himself to the hospital, and unfortunately, the doctors discovered he had a severe concussion from this fall, and he had a brain bleed that almost certainly would require surgery at some point down the road. Also, the numbness in his legs appeared to be the result of permanent nerve damage. He almost immediately lost the job at SpaceX because he couldn't travel to Florida to start the job. Everything he had worked for had just been taken away. But despite how bad Chandler's accident was, the trauma it inflicted on Chandler and his family was nothing compared to what happened next. The Haldersons owned a small cabin that was located in a part of Wisconsin called White Lake. This cabin had been in the Halderson family since the 1940s. It was like their vacation home. Just 2 weeks after Chandler's horrific injury, there was this huge storm that rolled through the White Lake area. And after the storm had passed, some people who lived permanently in White Lake called Bart and Krista and told them, hey, I was driving past your cabin and I saw there was some broken windows. It looks like your cabin might have been damaged from this storm. And so Bart and Krista pull out their calendar and they see the next weekend coming up is the 4th of July weekend. And so Bart and Krista, they figure, you know what, let's just hold off and head up to our cabin in a couple of days to time it with the 4th of July weekend and kind of have a mini vacation up there. But right before they left for this trip up to White Lake, Bart and Krista started acting a little weird. The day before Bart and Krista are supposed to leave for this trip, they begin packing up their things. And since Chandler lives with them, he's at home, he sees them doing this and just kind of watched them pack. And what he saw is they were packing lots and lots of cash and silver bars into their luggage. Although this was kind of odd to Chandler, he decided not to say anything. And at some point, Chandler asked his parents, so how are you getting up to White Lake? And his parents would say, oh, we're just getting a ride from our friends, another couple. They're driving us up. But they didn't tell him who the couple was. They basically just said, it's our friends. The next morning, Chandler got up early at about 6 a.m. He began slowly hobbling his way down the stairs, expecting to see his mom and dad having breakfast, but he gets downstairs and the house is dark and totally empty, and all of the bags that his parents had packed the night before and put near the front door, they were all gone. And so Chandler's thinking, did my parents get up at like 5 a.m. and leave without telling me? Chandler just told himself that his parents would be just fine. And so because his parents were now going to be gone for the weekend, he promptly called his girlfriend, Catherine, and asked her to come over. But by the end of the weekend, on Sunday morning, there was an undertone that both of them noticed that something was wrong. Chandler had told his girlfriend about the strangeness of his parents' quick departure to White Lake. By Sunday, Bart and Krista had still not called or texted or checked in with Chandler or Mitchell or anybody. But by late that day, Krista would text her son, Chandler. And what she basically said was, hey, we arrived in White Lake. You know, it's packed here. The service is terrible, but we're going to stick around for the parade and we'll be back either Monday night or Tuesday early. But the next day, Monday, Bart and Krista did not come home. They didn't call anyone. They didn't text anyone. And then the day after that, on Tuesday, July 6th, they didn't come home. Additionally, on Tuesday, Krista's office began calling Chandler and Mitchell, asking if they knew where Krista was. She was scheduled to work on that day, Tuesday the 6th, and she was scheduled to work on that previous Friday, which was the day Bart and Krista left for the lake, meaning she had left on this trip without telling anybody at work. They're calling other people in White Lake to see if anybody knows where they are, but nobody does. And so finally, the next morning on Wednesday, July 7th, when still there was no word from Bart and Krista, Chandler goes to the police and he files a missing person report. The police in Windsor contacted the police up north in White Lake and asked them to do a check on this cabin. But when the White Lake police arrived at the Halderson cabin, Bart and Krista were not there. No one was there. In fact, the cabin looked like it had not been used in months. The outside was totally overgrown, and inside there was no food in the fridge. And interestingly, the police would also tell Chandler, Mitchell, and Catherine that there was no damage done to this cabin. There were no broken windows or any sign, at least no obvious sign, of storm damage to this cabin. And so after this revelation, of course, Bart and Krista's family is like, wait a minute, who called them and told them to head up there to fix these obvious broken windows? Are those the same mystery friends that drove them up in the first place? I mean, what's going on here? Was this some sort of trap? Have they been set up? Are they okay? And so by the following day, Thursday, July 8th, the police made a discovery that at first seemed relatively minor, relatively small, but when they examined it more closely, they realized it was a huge discovery and it completely broke the case wide open. So 3 days before Bart and Krista hopped into that mystery person's car, Bart had finally just had it. There had been something bothering him for a really long time, and he had just finally decided, you know what? Today, I'm going to get to the bottom of it. And so Bart pulled out his phone, he punched in a number, he put it to his ear, and after a few rings, a young man named Omar Job answered his call. And so after this 17-minute phone call finally comes to an end, Bart is left kind of in shock, but he knows he now needs to set up an even more intense meeting with a group of people, and he needs to tell them what he just learned from Omar. It was set for 3 p.m. on July 1st. July 1st was the day before Bart and Krista would leave for White Lake. And so on July 1st, Bart was working from home, and at some point he looked at his watch and he saw it was just after 2 p.m. And so Bart stopped working and he texted Chandler, who was in the house with him. He just said, ready to leave when you are. Chandler was aware of how important this meeting was for his dad. He also understood the terrible position his dad was in. And so he had agreed to go with his dad to this meeting. They begin walking towards the front door. But then something happens. Chandler was standing behind Bart, and so as they're moving towards the door, Chandler reaches out and grabs a rifle he was hiding on the first floor. He raises it and he fires at least 2 shots into his father's back. And then once his father fell to the ground and was either dead or dying, Chandler, calm as can be, pulled out his phone and he texted his mother and told her, hey, dad's phone is dead, so just text me. And then Chandler also sent his mother a text saying, get soda on your way home. To which his mother just wrote, "'Kay, I can," smiley face. All Chandler was trying to do was buy as much time as possible to prep the house for his mother's return. He moved his father's body into some hiding place, and then after maybe trying to clean up a little bit, Chandler laid in wait for his mother. And at 4:58 p.m., Krista would clock out of her job at the automotive shop. She would make a pit stop at a store to buy Chandler some soda, and then between 5:15 and 5:30, security cameras on neighbors' houses would pick her up pulling into her driveway. And then just a couple of minutes later, she walked inside of her beautiful little dream home where she had raised her family over the past couple of decades, only to be immediately gunned down by her son the second she walked inside. It would turn out Chandler was living a double life. He had never graduated from college. He had gone to college, but for like a semester and flunked out. As for his head injury, he may have bumped his head at some point, but that doctor just told him he might have a mild concussion and then offered him a neck brace and told him, you don't need to wear it. That's only if you want to wear it. In short, Chandler lied about virtually every aspect of his life to virtually everyone in his life. However, his parents were becoming more and more suspicious. Specifically, in 2021, he was telling them, oh yeah, I'm working at the insurance company, but he never had any money. He could barely pay rent to his family, if at all. And so his dad would say to him, how is it you are employed but have no money? But Bart and Krista were also suspicious of other aspects of Chandler's life, like, for example, his school records. At some point, he needed to show them his transcripts, and he would tell them, oh, I can't access my transcripts. And so Bart and Krista are like, why? Can't you just log in and pull up your unofficial transcripts at least? He would create fictitious email accounts of people that were college advisors at Madison College, where he claimed to have gone and graduated from, and he would do those phony back and forths where it looked like the college was telling Chandler, sorry, you can't get your transcripts. It's this huge problem that's totally our fault, not yours, but you just gotta wait. There's nothing else you can do. We can't get them for you right now. Bart had just had it with his son. He was convinced his son was lying or there was something going on, and so Bart decided he was just going to call Madison College and pretend to be Chandler and see if he could get his transcripts. And so he's on this call pretending to be Chandler, and he's kind of barking at Omar to give me my transcripts right now. I go to your school. There's no reason you can keep them from me. But then after a couple of minutes, Omar finally was able to talk, and he said, hey, Chandler, I looked you up in the system, and you don't go to this school. You've never gone to this school, save for maybe one semester, and you failed out. And so he hung up with Omar, and then Bart called real college advisors at Madison College, and he set a meeting for July 1st at 3 p.m. And then he told Chandler, and they together were going to ask those college advisors why they can't produce Chandler's transcripts. But the way Chandler handled being caught was not to own up to any of this. He didn't call off the meeting. He just waited until the day of the meeting, and then he killed his father, killed his mother, and then dismembered their bodies and burned their body parts in the family fireplace, including their heads. And then when he couldn't destroy their bodies completely, he took what was left of their remains and scattered them all over town in parks and forests and rivers. He even put his father's headless, armless, legless torso behind his girlfriend's parents' house. And all the while, as he's doing this, he's spinning this ridiculous story to his girlfriend, to his brother, to police. Ultimately, though, Chandler did so many things that got him caught. From the mountain of physical evidence he left behind inside of his house, where he killed and dismembered his parents, and also at the various dump sites where he didn't even bury the body parts. He would just put them underneath sticks and branches, and so they were very easy to find. To his extremely suspicious behavior on July 7th when he walked into the police station and reported his parents missing. That whole time he was talking to police officers, he was acting so weird and was just saying things that didn't make sense, and he just totally came off like a guy who did not care at all that his parents were gone and really just seemed like a guy who was hiding something. But the big breakthrough that happened on July 8th that broke the case open stemmed from the text message Krista's phone sent to Chandler's phone on July 4th. When Chandler walked into the police station on July 7th and said, "My parents are missing," one of the first questions they had for him was, "Okay, well, when was the last time you spoke to your parents?" And Chandler would tell them he got a text message from his mother, Krista, on Sunday, July 4th. And then he showed them the text message. And the text message said that they had arrived in White Lake and they were going to be sticking around for the parade and they'd be back in a couple of days. But the police noticed that this text message had been sent on July 4th, but in White Lake that year, the parade was on July 3rd. So when this text came through, the parade that anyone in White Lake would be aware of, it's a small place, you're not going to miss this parade, the parade had already happened. So why would Krista be texting her son that she was going to stick around in White Lake for the parade that had already happened? And so this led police to check phone records, and they would discover that text message was sent from Krista's phone to Chandler's phone. But when it was sent on July 4th, Krista's phone was not in White Lake. Instead, it was inside of the Halderson home, right near Chandler's phone. And they found Krista's phone in the garage, underneath a drawer, inside of a shoe, wrapped in tinfoil, next to her driver's license. And so this discrepancy really opened up the floodgates, and before long, it was beyond obvious that Chandler was the killer. And after a thorough investigation, it was determined that Chandler had acted entirely alone. Chandler would ultimately be found guilty of killing his parents, and he would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chandler has still not taken any responsibility for what he's done. Instead, he just tells anybody who will listen that his plan is to continue to appeal his verdict.